Good morning in chat. We'll give it maybe 30 more seconds, and then Titus, I'll turn it to you for update, and then we'll hear an update about the early childhood agenda from Marisa. There's still folks joining. All right, Titus, why don't you start with a quick update?
Great. Thanks, Amy. Hello, everybody. We sent an email out yesterday, Strategies for Children email, encouraging you all to contact the conference committee, and 137 people have taken action so far. And this is to get the maximum amount possible for early education and care in the FY25 budget. I'll put the link in chat, and if you haven't taken action yet, please do so. Now is a good time, right, Amy? You said the committee is, well, we know that the budget is late and the committee is still working on the budget. So now's a good time.
That's right. Thanks, Titus. We know also, Common Start there's been a lot of activity around advocacy. But since here we are on July 2nd, we just want to make sure we're kind of staying at the top of legislators' inboxes. So you can take action with the link. All right, Marisa, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Amy O, and hi, everyone. Happy 4th of July week. We sort of have a little bit of a hybrid 9:30 call today. So if there are questions or if you want to have a little bit of a discussion around the early childhood agenda, just feel free to stop me at any point. And otherwise, we thought we could give a little bit of an overview of what's been going on with the agenda and where you can find certain resources online. So to start there. All right, so just as a little bit of a background, the early childhood agenda really sort of began on the 9:30 call in a lot of ways. During the pandemic, we were getting a lot of requests for guest speakers and information and connection with all of the various sort of sectors that work in early childhood but aren't necessarily connected. And wanted to create a space where coalitions that are working on issues that affect young children and families and individuals who are interested in, working on places where there might be a gap in some of the advocacy in early childhood can come together, can come up with solutions, can, further our learning, experiment when we need to, learn from a pilot program as an example. And that's really what the early childhood agenda is. So I'm going to put the link in the chat just so you all have the website. If you have not seen our website yet, it is a really great resource to get a better understanding of sort of what the agenda is and how it all began. We also have a one-pager, which does a great job of sort of explaining the history of the agenda. So the agenda launched in 2022 and really was this collaborative experience. We had over 1,000 people participate in that process of coming up with our top 10 priorities. There was statewide representation, and we had, I think, over 60% of the people who participated identified as people who either were the caregiver of a young child under the age of 8 or who in their professional roles interact with children and families every day. And then over 50% actually were parents of young children. So we were really happy to see sort of that kind of representation in the agenda's sort of initial phases. And we've been carrying that through sort of the past few years. So each of the different working groups of the agenda, the planning teams for those are kind of composed of organizations that have content expertise in that area. So I see there's actually a number of our facilitators are on the call today. And then we also have lived experience leaders. And I saw that there's a couple lived experience leaders that are also on the call today. And the intention there is really to make sure that, in setting the meeting agendas and coming up with the activities of all the different work groups and planning for all of those various meetings, that we have people with lived experience at the table and informing those decisions, because we know that that's how good policy ends up getting passed. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. If you haven't taken a look at the one-pager, it is a great resource. All right, so in 2022, we, this huge group of over 1,000 met and came up with a list of 10 priorities for the early childhood community to focus on. And across those priorities, you can really see that we have a sort of a mix of areas where there are coalitions that are already working in that space and where there were maybe gaps, where we needed to further our research to better understand what was happening, to come together as a community and continue learning. And so I'll give a couple examples here. So as an example of a space where we know that there is coalition leadership and we really want to do a good job of connecting people who are interested in early childhood advocacy and policy to those coalitions. The first priority was around early education and care and strengthening that system. And we know that the Common Start Coalition has been doing a great job of convening in that space and working on policy priorities and solutions. Another example, I see Naomi's on the call, is the Lift Our Kids Coalition. So one of the other priorities that came out of this meeting was around cash assistance grants, and the Lift Our Kids Coalition has been doing a really great job trying to move that bar a little bit higher each year. Healthy Families Tax Credit Coalition is another, and the Feed Kids Coalition is another. So you can see here that there's sort of a number of coalitions that are working in early childhood that sort of touch the different early childhood agenda priorities. You can also see that some of these priorities have become a reality. So they're kind of entering this new implementation phase where, there was huge success over the past couple of years in accomplishing some of these goals. So an example of that is that Massachusetts now has free school meals for children who are in pre-K to 12 settings. And that was, an incredible win for the state and for that advocacy community. And at the same time, we also know that hunger is something that touches children across, touches humans across all spectrums of life. And we want to think about a comprehensive solution to address early childhood hunger. So while we are so excited that that sort of priority of the agenda passed, we're also looking at what it can mean moving forward to address early childhood hunger within the early childhood agenda and in partnership with Project Bread, who has launched a new coalition called the Make Hunger History Coalition, and is working on some statewide solutions around that piece. So that's just sort of one example of sort of this relationship between coalition work and the early childhood agenda, really just trying to increase awareness, increase connection from the early childhood community to the various coalitions, and ensure that solutions that are being developed are both, interconnected, and that we have opportunities to communicate with each other, because that, there isn't always time in the day for that, and that there's sort of awareness of what's happening in early childhood and the policy world. At the same time, a number of our priorities from the early childhood agenda did not necessarily have a coalition that was working in that space, or there wasn't a clear consensus of what the next step should be, or who was sort of taking the lead. So what we've done there is really partner with a number of, as I mentioned, organizations that had that content expertise and could be facilitators for working groups, while also partnering with lived experience leaders to further our learning in those areas. So some of those examples are our second priority, which was around workforce compensation for the early childhood professionals, around developmental monitoring, screening, referrals, and the delivery of services. So that sort of whole entire spectrum that we see in early childhood, around a local infrastructure and partnerships. So we know that, at the local level, there needs to be, a system of technological and physical infrastructure in place, relationships in place, convening and governance, funding, all of these different components that we know are really important at the local level to ensure that when families are trying to access early childhood programs and services and resources, they have all of the different pieces in place that they need. So those are a couple examples of where there wasn't necessarily consensus, and we wanted to really partner with other members of the early childhood community to further our learning. And over the past few months, that's exactly what we've been doing. So the first thing I wanted to share, or at least point out, is the early childhood agenda has come on the 9:30 call a couple times now. So I believe we've had every single working group on the 9:30 call, and we recorded all of them. So you can see that on our YouTube playlist here is where we have all of the early childhood agenda recordings saved. So all the way back to sort of the beginning of the agenda and the development of those 10 priorities, through meetings that we've had on the 9:30 call and the various working groups that have joined us, including coalitions as well. So you can see Naomi and Lift Our Kids joined back in 2023, Healthy Families Tax Credit, And since then, we've had a lot of meetings of the, here it is, of the working groups. So you can, if you have any questions around some of the latest sort of work of the working groups, or you want to get a better sense of what they've been working on, you can watch this recording. The other thing that we wanted to share is, oops, gonna go back a page, is this homepage. So if you have not been involved with the early childhood agenda yet, but you're interested, you can go on our website, you can see the 10 priorities. If you click on details, it'll give you some additional information around, what that priority means, who's sort of the lead advocate. And then if you're interested in joining, all you have to do is click on the four-part or the Join Us button, and you'll see sort of a couple different options here. So the first is just staying connected. So like many organizations, we're trying to kind of segment our emailing to make sure that, we're not just cross-promoting everything all at once. So if you're interested in the early childhood agenda, signing up for the website, signing up for the email list is sort of the best way to make sure that you're getting constant updates and you have a good sense of what's going on. And at the same time, if you are interested in joining either a coalition or one of the work groups, you can sign up for those at the bottom of the page here. So if you were to click on, say, establish an adequate safety net Lift Our Kids coalition, if you were to click on that button, it would bring you to the Lift Our Kids page and you'd be able to sign up for their mailing list there. At the same time, if you're interested in one of the work groups, if you click on sort of the link here, it'll bring you to a Google form, which allows you to sign up for one of the work groups. And then we are filtering that to the different facilitators and they're incorporating you into the mailing list there. That's sort of how you get involved or stay connected to the early childhood agenda. And then the last little bit I wanted to share here on this page is the action areas. So as we are sort of nearing the end of this initial 2-year timeline. So when we launched the agenda, we wanted to give ourselves 2 years to kind of get this whole structure up and running, and to start to think about solutions for some of the different priorities, both the coalitions and within the work groups. So what we've asked the work groups to do is to develop recommendations by December of 2024. And what that really means is we're expecting the work groups will have some recommendations that touch on policy change, either through the legislature with a bill necessarily, or it could be through the administration with regulatory change or policy change at the state government level. At the same time, we know that that is not, that there are often opportunities that may get missed beyond that. So we're really thinking about, where is there an opportunity to further research or to pilot an exciting initiative or to think about collaboration in a different way. So we're not just targeting some of our elected officials and key decision makers at the state government level. We're also thinking a little bit more broadly around what solutions might exist in the early childhood community that go beyond that. And so with that, by December, we're hoping that we'll have a set of recommendations and we can start to think about what the early childhood agenda looks like in the future. And one of the things that's, I think, important to acknowledge here is that there's a lot of moving pieces when you have 10 different priorities. There's coalitions working in some ways, there's working groups. And so one of the things we've been thinking about has been, how do we simplify the structure? How do we think about early childhood in a really cohesive way? And we still make sure that we're, getting specific enough that we can get to solutions that are real and that will have an impact, but also making sure that it keeps that kind of interconnected nature and that we're not segmenting ourselves so far that it becomes hard for, someone who's working on developmental monitoring and screening to have a point of connection with someone who might be working on local infrastructure and partnerships, as an example. And so I just wanted to remind everyone of these different action areas. So this was really how we got to the 10 priorities in the first place. Back in 2022, we hosted conversations that were sort of structured around these 5 different areas. And the intention here was that these conversations were focused on various challenges that children and families face every day around sort of key components of an early childhood system. So when we came up with what these key components should be, we really narrowed in on financially secure families, high quality experiences, a thriving early childhood workforce, robust system infrastructure and partnerships, and healthy beginnings. So wanted to remind everyone that this was sort of the origin of the agenda, and it's something that we're considering, phasing back into as we think about the next phase of the agenda as well. And I see there's a couple things in the chat, so I'm going to pause and just see if there are any comments or questions there. Oh yeah, Titus, do you want to say a little bit about work group 4 and what you all are working on? And then I can go over some of the updates from our other working groups as well.
Sure. Thanks, Marissa. So as Marissa said, we're in this period now of starting to develop recommendations or other work that will be finished by December of this year. So our working group, which meets monthly, all the working groups meet once per month, is engaging its own members plus the larger community in trying to get feedback and input on what our recommendations should be. And so we came up with 4 as a planning committee, 4 possible recommendations around developmental monitoring, screening, referral, and follow-up of services. But we want to hear from as many people as possible. That's why we created this survey. We'll talk more about this in an upcoming 9:30 call. Every work group, I think, is working a little differently, or engaging its members, or creating surveys, or doing other types of work. Thanks.
Thanks, Titus. And yeah, I think that's a great example. So I can share a little bit about work group 6, which is around local partnerships and infrastructure. We've really been, spent the past few months kind of narrowing in on what are some of the key components that are required in a local system. Some of those being, what does convening look like at the local community? What does governance look like? How is the local community sort of maximizing funding and identifying funding for early childhood programs and services? What does family voice and lived experience look like at the local level? How is that sort of intentionally built into governance and to decision-making power? And then thinking about, the physical, technological infrastructure and how families are connecting to or are navigating systems of support, and what sort of needs to be in place for that to be successful as well. And a lot of our work has really been building off of the Connecting the Dots report that the Urban Institute finished a few months ago, which I will put in the chat as well. And one of the sort of initial activities that we've been thinking about has been a survey that will really further our learning from this Connecting the Dots report and give us a better sense of what is needed at the local level, where different communities are in terms of this family navigation of systems of support, and how some of the practitioners or professionals who are working in that role sort of can give us a better understanding of what's happening at the local level. So we've reached out to a number of professionals who sit at those roles. So the CFCEs, the Coordinated Family and Community Engagement professionals, are one of those examples. We've been talking to some home visitors. We've been thinking about the community health workers, and just a variety of sort of professionals who really are responsible for connecting families to resources to help them navigate an early childhood system. So that is our sort of next step with work group 6 in the survey there. And what we're really hoping to do is to get a better sense from all of those different people who are sort of helping with the family navigation piece at the local level, on what might be needed and where we can go in terms of recommendations. At the same time, we're also really interested in funding, in both better understanding, what funding is coming into the state as a whole, and then eventually down at the local level, being able to sort of map where early childhood funding is going, if we're maximizing the funding that we have available to us as a community in Massachusetts, and then being able to identify what those gaps will be. And then also really thinking about what supports might be necessary at the local level to manage funding. We hear, I think all of you have likely applied for a grant at some point or another. And when you do, you see this term braiding and blending funding constantly. And there's a specific use for both of those words. And I think there's also a lot of confusion around what that means. So thinking about, who's needed at the local level to really make sure that, we have a good sense of an understanding of where all of these resources are coming in for early childhood, and how we can be maximizing that and coordinating it in a more intentional way. Because again, we know that, there's funding coming in from health and from education and state funding streams, federal funding streams, et cetera. It's a lot to manage, and oftentimes at the local level, there isn't a person who sort of wakes up every day and that's their role or their responsibility. So we are very excited to continue thinking about that piece as well too. And then in terms of governance and convening, and then family voice, what we're really excited about there is that there's some really incredible both state and sort of national models to be able to look at. So, within Family Voice, I think we've been incorporating some examples of what has happened in the state. Where are there family councils at the local level, or even at the state level? How do our state departments incorporate Family Voice as they're making decisions about programs and services? And then at the same time, there's incredible examples from across the state where other states have really intentionally built in opportunities for Family Voice. So there's a great example out in the state of Washington, where they have passed a lived experience bill, which now requires the state to pay any individual who's sort of serving in sort of like an advisory manner with the legislature a consultant's fee. So they've set sort of a pay ranking based on how much they would be paying any consultant that was working with state government. So that's a really incredible example of sort of valuing lived experience and thinking about how if we're working on policy solutions, we need to make sure that we're compensating the individuals who are closest to the work there and able to help with policy solutions. And then at the same time, in governance and convening, I think there's some really incredible examples across Massachusetts, even of communities that have come together and have thought about offices of early childhood, or have thought about a council that might sit in city government or within the mayor's office, and then also coalitions that are in the local community and are serving a really important role in terms of the sort of advocacy and policy change at the local level. So wanting to pull together the lessons learned there and eventually be able to, one, recommend sort of a roadmap for Massachusetts as a whole, but also to create a resource for local communities that is really meant to be sort of a blueprint or a sort of like self-assessment tool of, these are the different components that we might have in place already as a local community. These are the components that we do not have in place yet, but we are interested in. And then to recognize that this is not going to be a one size fits all, that there needs to be flexibility because every community in Massachusetts looks very different, and to allow for that flexibility in some of the recommendations here as well. All right, I see we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to pause and just see if there's any questions or anyone else who, I know we have a number of people on the call today who have been involved with the agenda. So if you have anything you'd want to add from your work group's perspective or comments, feel free to jump in.
I'll add that we have invited all the work groups to come back on the 9:30 call, and as Marisa said, we want to use the 9:30 call, for this half an hour kind of quick connection with the larger community. There, the work groups are meeting monthly. There are planning meetings that are happening with the facilitators and lived experience leaders. So there are lots of opportunities to get involved, and we are also using Basecamp, which is kind of an online platform to kind of keep the conversation going in between. Naomi.
Hi, thanks. I thought I would just take a moment to remind folks what the Lift Our Kids Coalition is working on. As has been mentioned, we're one of the groups trying to fulfill goal number 3, which is ensuring that families have enough basic income to raise their children in a healthy way. And so our focus has been on trying to raise cash assistance grants. So this is the TAFDC program administered by the Department of Transitional Assistance for very, very low-income families with children. And the grant amounts that people get, even once they've jumped through all the hoops to qualify, the grants that they get are still abysmally low, far below even half the federal poverty level. So we have been working for a number of years to try to get those grants increased with some success along the way. We still have a long way to go, but we have gotten cumulatively about 30% increases from where we started. So I'm going to put the Lift Our Kids website in the chat for anybody who wants to find out more or sign up to get our emails. What's happening right now is that both the House and Senate budgets include a 10% increase to cash assistance grants. So for example, the maximum right now that a family of 3 can get is $783 a month. And if you can imagine being a single mom trying to raise 2 kids on that, good luck to you. So we're trying to make progress. Again, a 10% increase is nowhere near enough, but it is an important step in the right direction. But what's been proposed in both budgets is the increase would have a delayed effective date. It wouldn't start at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is yesterday. It would not start until next April, 2025. And so we are advocating, we actually believe that there's enough money already in what's allocated to increase grants earlier. And that is because the caseload, the number of families receiving this benefit hasn't increased as much as the administration projected that it might increase when they said, here's how much we need for the program. So we think that the amount that's already been proposed, we're not asking for more money now, could be used to raise the grants sooner, not have to wait until next April. And so we're advocating for them to the increases to take effect in October. And would love support. I know many of you in this call are on our list or in organizations that are members of Lift Our Kids Coalition. Anybody who is not already, we'd love to have you join us.
Thanks so much, Naomi. Do you want to say a little bit too? Because I think this is also just a important context for why you all are advocating against the April delay, for just a little bit about what happened this fiscal year and sort of with the governor's
Sure.
too, I think that's important too.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I know we're about out of time, but so as I mentioned, we succeeded in getting 3 incremental increases so far in fiscal years 21, 22, and 23. And we actually also had succeeded in the budget in getting one for FY 24. And that had a delayed start date. You know, they do this just because then it costs less money in that given budget, right? If they don't have to cover the whole year. So they had put in an increase that was supposed to take effect in April of this year, which was late in, you know, 3/4 of the way through the FY 24 fiscal year. But then as the state revenues were falling off and the administration was starting to think about where they might need to cut to balance the budget, the governor ended up eliminating that increase when she made what's called 9C cuts. This is a provision of the law that allows the governor to make cuts when there isn't the money that the legislature had originally said she could spend. And so she eliminated that increase before it even took effect. So there was no increase in FY 24. The last increase to grants that we successfully got into place was in October 2022. So even if we get the date moved up to October for this year, it will have been 2 years. And we all know what inflation has been like, right? So it will have been 2 years since there was any increase to try to get folks even a tiny bit closer. And I see the question in the chat, very good question about the federal poverty level, which of course is not realistic. It's not realistic broadly, and it's certainly not realistic for Massachusetts because that's an average number. Sorry, that's an average national number, right? That, you know, Massachusetts has really high cost of living. And so, so that is not something that the Lift Our Kids Coalition is working on. It certainly is something more broadly, nationally, that's a concern. But, you know, we've been using the federal poverty level as a very inadequate measure because it's something that is what, you know, that is officially established, recognized as sort of at least a bare minimum. And so when our grants are less than half of that, you know, we have a pretty compelling argument that they need to be raised. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Naomi, for the update. All right, Amy, I will turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Thanks, Marissa. Just we wanted to make sure there was an opportunity to kind of hear what's happening. We were so happy to all be together on May 8th at Fuller Park, and there's a blog post on our Iron Early Education blog, that Iron Early Childhood blog, that kind of highlights that. And so it's not too late to get involved. We've learned so many lessons about kind of what it takes to keep something like this going, and just want to appreciate the facilitators, the lived experience leaders, and all the folks that are joining the work groups. And we'll continue to share updates on the 9:30 call. So at 10:03, Naomi, thanks so much for sharing your update as well. Really helpful. We will see everybody on Monday morning. So please enjoy some time off. And we know that this is also a very incredibly busy time as transitions are happening. So we are thinking of each of you as you get ready for summer in your programs. And we will see you all next week. Have a great day.